Yes.
All right, we're live. Howdy, everyone, and welcome to Node Foundation Enterprise Conversations. I'm Tracy Hines, Node Education Community Manager, here along with Michael Rogers, Community Manager for the Node Foundation. Say hi.
Hello.
Awesome. And we're here today with Miles Borens, Developer Advocate for Node on Google Cloud Platform. How's it going, Miles?
Going well. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to dive right in. Miles, can you tell us a little bit about your role and team at Google?
Oh, that's a good question. So I work in developer advocacy as part of the cloud group, also known as Google Cloud Platform, GCP for short. My full position is a developer advocate, and I'm focused on Node primarily due to the work that I have done on core. I sit on the CTC and I help to run our LTS program. My group is filled with lots of awesome T-shaped people who work all across the stack with different languages, but tend to have focus areas. A lot of what we do as advocates over at Google is both going out, finding out how people are using products and what's blocking them and why they're not adopting things, and then come back and work internally with stakeholders to make sure that they hear about what's going on the outside and what people are using or not using. The biggest thing for me right now is actually finding out doing a lot of human-centric design and wayfinding around how people are running Node in production right now, how people are running Node in production at scale, or if they're at organizations that can't or won't run Node, what are the things that are blocking or stopping them from doing it?
What are some of those things?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, and these are all, mostly theories and based on anecdotes, and the plan is over a couple months to put together something a little more concrete. I think complexity is one of them. As you start to have like lots of large microservices or lots of modules that are all interconnecting, how those all play with each other, how you update one and know how things, how that kind of change affects the combinatorial complexity of all your dependencies is really hard to manage. I also think and Michael, you and I have talked about this before, and I've talked about this with a number of other people from the community a bunch. Part of Node's success is the whimsical nature of Node and kind of the mantra of small core. So, I love the idea that Node is Unix. Node does one thing, it does it really, really well, and it tries to do as little of it as possible, leaving as much to the community and the NPM ecosystem as it can, which is really responsible for the explosion in number of modules and ecosystem usage. And in my opinion, I call it the quick time to wow is the marketing way of putting it. But just the fact that you can sit down and Google to find a module or go on NPM and search it up and quickly piece together something that does what you need to do is what allows non-technical founders of organizations to put together demos of their product in a weekend, and it's really amazing to see that. But this also acts as a detriment to large organizations or enterprises that have fungible engineers. You don't necessarily have engineers that are sitting and living in Node. You have people who are being picked up from a Python project, being thrown at a Node project, and for lack of a better term, they want some Rails to run things on, some clear and defined ways to do so. And that's really not the Node way. So reconciling that is going to be interesting. I've been thinking a lot about the difference between having a workflow that is on Rails versus libraries and whether or not we're conflating the two, but that's still kind of something that I'm playing with in my head.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's, I think it's sort of on the same lines as in education. I've had the same sort of ask. I think we've talked about that a little bit, where it's sort of can we provide the, you just hand it off to somebody as an environment, in a VM and say here you go, you can write Node now. It helps a lot when we're teaching it as well. sort of being able to avoid having that ramp up if we already like have that dictated to them in some way. So where in your stack are your customers using Node?
So we have a number of different products that people are using Node on. If you go to, am I allowed to plug links for my company while we're doing this?
Go for it.
Yeah.
So if you go to cloud.google.com/free, you can see our free tier of things that we offer, and there's a handful of different ways that you can start running Node today. We offer VMs, like that's the classic way to approach it. You can spin up a VM and just like run Node in there. A lot of people do that with like stuff like PM2 or Forever or like whatever you want to use in your environment. You can go ahead and do that. This won't solve a lot of the problems around, scale or monitoring. Like, you're kind of, at the behest of your environment and rolling everything by hand if you want to do that. So if you want a little bit more of like, an easier experience, we have Google App Engine. Google App Engine Flex was just brought into GA recently. What that means in non-Google terms is that we actually offer an SLA on the uptime and support contract for App Engine Node apps. So you can run Google App Engine Flex with Node, and if you have the gcloud CLI utility inside of a project with a package JSON with npm start defined, you can just do gcloud app deploy, and you will be running your Node app on App Engine, and that will have auto scaling. It will have hooks into all sorts of magic for logging with Stackdriver if you include the right modules, and that's a pretty awesome experience. You can take that a step further by throwing in a Docker file, and people are doing that as well. App Engine will respect your Docker file and set up the image appropriately. Then Kubernetes, I've seen a lot of people, once you've Dockerized your Node stuff, you could then use Kubernetes as a way to run Node at scale. Kubernetes offers some really awesome abstractions for spinning up, for handling any sort of load balancing that you want to do. It also becomes like really easy to do like rollover deployments or green-blue deployments or any sort of like advanced stuff that you want to do around health checking. These are all built into Kubernetes, as well as like stuff like Nginx or like any sort of routing that also is handled in Kubernetes with something called Ingress, which we run on Google Cloud. The free tier gives you a free cluster. You have to pay for the actual nodes in your cluster, but I believe when I priced it down, you can, I believe near free or for like less than $20 a month, be running on a really, really small Kubernetes cluster that you can be deploying things to.
So what kinds of customers are using each of these pieces, right? Like this is like a lot of like technology kind of getting thrown around, but like what types of customers are using these different tiers and different technologies, and why are they picking one or the other?
Yeah, so if we go and look at it, we are seeing, and I know this is a later slide, so I'm not gonna get too far into it, but we're seeing a lot of use of App Engine Flex for people that are spinning up projects that they just want to get into the wild. I would compare this almost to like Heroku, where it's just like, I have this thing and I want to get it out there. We're not talking about like massively large compute, but just ease of use of getting things into the wild. Alternatively, I would say the user profile for people on the Kubernetes side are people who are running things much more at scale, larger organizations. Also, and like one of the things I really like about Kubernetes is it can be cloud agnostic. So people who are potentially writing failover applications that are running on multiple clouds or multi-cloud, not to be confused with multi-pass. But so the multi-cloud stuff is really interesting because you can federate a bunch of different clusters. And so I can't really speak too much to particular customers, but I do know that there are organizations that I've talked to that are running Kubernetes at scale and are using our cluster as one of many clusters federated across multiple cloud providers. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Cool. So I guess that sort of, if we're not already really into that, is what compute services are your customers building?
Yeah, so so as we're going through the different kinds of compute, like we've got like VMs, we've got App Engine environments. One that's actually really interesting, and this is internally another thing, is Google Cloud Functions. So the kind of services, compute services that people are building with Node range from, small processing stuff, like with Cloud Functions, you're able to just like, take a new item that's put into cloud storage and process that, to extremely large applications that are, I'm trying to think of examples that I can bring up, and unfortunately I'm failing at the moment. My greenness in the organization is currently showing. But people are building backend applications for processing data. People are building applications for AI and machine learning. So we have a bunch of AI and ML APIs that are available in Node. That, like, one of the magic things that App Engine offers, for example, is most of our APIs that require any sort of API tokens or any sort of auth tokens just kind of magically get the tokens if you're running it in an App Engine environment. So we're seeing some really interesting stuff happening with the natural language API, with our image processing API. We just are starting a private run with our video API. So there's a lot of interesting use cases that are coming up there.
Awesome. So is there any like particular use case that you've been really excited by that you've seen so far?
So from the Node side, unfortunately, there's not like really, really high level things that I know that I'm cleared to talk about.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the hard thing with these enterprise conversations. Like, generally companies can talk about what they're doing. One thing I can say is like Cloud Functions, Cloud Functions are Node and the runtime is Node, and that is a really interesting compute service that we're building.
Awesome. So why did Google choose to support Node?
So I think that there's a lot of history here before my time. I think that a lot of supporting Node comes down to the growth of the platform and the popularity of the platform. Michael, I think you were in this issue, but there was an issue from like 2008. So I'm going to dial it back. One of the things that I think can be easily forgotten about App Engine is that this is a product that's like a decade old. It's over a decade old. It's something that was, for lack of a better term and not trying to sound too cheesy, was ahead of its time as far as like what it was offering and what people were able to do with it. That's tangential to whether or not the interface and experience was something that people were looking for, but it's a product that we've seen through other vendors as something people are very interested in. So if you can actually go to our issue tracker, and there was an issue from 2008 prior to Node even existing, asking for JavaScript on App Engine as a runtime. And you saw things thrown around like Rhino, I think, was one that was offered there as a potential runtime. And like, if you ever want to like take a moment to like do some archaeology on the history of Node, of JavaScript being run on the server prior to Node, looking at that thread, it's a great place. But this was like a 9-year-old thread that we just closed a couple months ago when we moved App Engine Flex to kind of this public offering with an SLA. So people have been asking for JavaScript on App Engine before Node even existed. And I think with the timing was right around the same time as the foundation, may have played a role into it, but I have no idea about that. But what I can talk to is the results, which is that at this point, Node is the fastest growing and I believe the largest deployment platform on App Engine. So there are more Node.js apps being deployed on App Engine than any other platform, and this is in just 2 years.
Oh, wow. So with that, do you end up seeing like are customers adopting Node over Java or Ruby or other languages? Are you seeing like more people coming in general, or also switching over?
So again, this is something that I don't have exact numbers on and can't speak to internal stuff. I would like to believe that we're getting more and new customers rather than moving over shops that are already using particular things. My feeling is that, you know, like shops that are using Ruby or shops that are using Java are doing things at a larger scale. You know, they're pretty embedded in the workflow in which they're already doing. Whereas with Node, we're offering, you know, it's a new offering for people who, I'm going to dial it back. I believe that we do not have lots of customers moving from one to the other, but we are seeing more adoption of Node in pure numbers of customers, but not necessarily in scale of compute.
Awesome.
It's probably not helping that we keep getting faster and keep bringing down the level of compute per process as well.
Yeah, we're too fast.
A friend of mine who's on Lambda said that when he went from 4 to 6, his bill got cut in half, and I was like, "That's terrible for Amazon." I don't know if they're going to keep taking new versions.
Yeah, I think there's also a lot of interesting stuff that we're starting to see. There was an article from the Electron team in the last couple of days about how they increased their startup time by like dumping the context of the VM and then like kind of bootstrapping that in at startup. I think we're going to start seeing some really interesting work happening at the implementer level as far as like ways of making Node that much faster. It's pretty exciting, especially like going from cold boot, which I think is not something that people necessarily thought of before. But when we're dealing with cloud functions, if you can make the cold boot half the time, that's huge. And just, I mean, I kind of just started throwing around words. So the idea would be is like if you have containers or a VM running in the cloud and you're sending traffic to it, it's always hot means it's always running, and all the traffic is always getting routed there, and there's no waiting time. Whereas with something like Cloud Functions, the idea is you're only paying for the time that you're using, which means that you're not always running your VMs, which means your VMs or your Docker containers or whatever abstraction model we're dealing with has to boot up before it can start accepting traffic. And that's what's known as a cold boot. So if you have something like a Cloud Function and your route that is triggering that Cloud Function hasn't been hit for 5 days, there's no reason that your service has been running that whole time, so you would have a cold boot. But if you then have 100 hits in the time of 5 seconds, it's not going to have to boot each time, so you are able to keep using the same warm service. But so I think we're going to see some interesting movement around fixing this cold boot problem, which is also a problem we see like in Kubernetes or any sort of load balancing situation where you have to spin up more machines to handle more load. The faster those machines can start handling traffic or handling any sort of communication, the better the experience and the faster you can scale.
Cool. So go ahead. No, sorry. So with that, do we get to hear or see you and the Google team at Node Interactive this year talking about some of this stuff?
Indeed. So I am open to sharing some of the things, Tracy, because I know content hasn't been selected yet. Are you open to me sharing some of the titles of things that we have submitted, or would you prefer that I just talk about high-level concepts that the team has submitted talks for?
Either, because I think it's, we hope that, the review process is still ongoing, but y'all are also, experts in what you do, and people will be able to have conversations about this with you as well.
Yeah, so we are planning a large presence at Interactive this year. We had a large presence at Interactive last year. There are at least 12 talks and 2 workshops that I know of that were submitted to the CFP, covering topics including governance, core management, debugging and dev tools, garbage collection, high performance code, continuous integration and deployment with Kubernetes and Node, how to understand memory leaks, going serverless, functions as a service, building cross-cloud serverless node applications, workshops for Kubernetes and Cloud Functions, Firebase and Angular, trace event performance analysis, taking ownership with OSS projects, and gRPC versus REST. These are, all different topics that we've sent out. We have people who have submitted from the V8 team, which I'm extremely excited about, as well as people from our internal Node Tools team, as well as open source contributors from our internal teams here at Google.
Wow. Yeah, so that was a nice wide range. Hopefully we'll get to hear more from that.
Yeah, everything from like how the VM does stuff to like how to communicate between multiple processes. This is all, stuff that we're working on here and stuff that people are really excited to bring. And I definitely can say, and this isn't just because, I'm on I'm part of the foundation and love all this stuff, but internally Google's really excited about interactive, and we have people who are extremely interested to travel across the world to come and attend.
Awesome. Cool. All right. So I think that's a wrap. Thanks so much, Miles, for joining us today. And thanks to Google for giving a little bit of your time to talk about it.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Thanks. Y'all take care.
Awesome.